The Wanderer's Notebook Volume 1. By Christopher Emrys. Copyright 2020. All rights reserved. Tabitha. Dynalta, plus 2003 tr. Mina drifted awake as the car came to a stop. She blinked a few times, looking around the car and out the window to see where she was. The car had stopped in a driveway in front of a large old house somewhere in the country. The house had 2 stories and no garage. The driveway formed a large arc that connected on both ends to the country road that she could see across the yard on the other side of the car. She unbuckled her seatbelt, opened the door, and climbed out of the car. The size and oldness of the house appeared foreboding, so she went and stood near her parents as they rummaged through the car's trunk. She felt more comfortable in their presence but couldn't take her eyes off the house, somehow not trusting it. "Are you ready to see your new house and your new bedroom?" her mom asked as she took Mina's hand and led her toward the house. Mina looked up at her mom. "Yes." They walked up the steps of the front porch toward the door, and Mina looked around curiously. The porch was wide with a little fence around its border and wooden posts rising to the small ceiling that hung over it. The wood creaked slightly with every step. Inside the house, directly across from the front door, a staircase led to the second floor on the left, and a long hallway on the right led to the back of the house. She could make out a door at the far end of the hall. Mina's mother took her to the first doorway on the right and showed her a large empty room. "This will be the dining room," her mother informed her before leading her down the hall to the next room on the right. The floors were wooden and creaked slightly as they walked down the hall. The next room's purpose was clear to Mina as she looked around at the stove, sink, refrigerator, and cabinets everywhere. They went back down the hall toward the front of the house and turned right, past the staircase and into another large empty room. This one had a doorway at the far end that led into another, slightly smaller room. Her mother explained that the first would be their living room where they'd watch TV and spend time with guests, while the second was going to be a room for her parents to do things in. "Okay, now for the bedrooms," her mother said as she led the way upstairs. At the top of the stairs was a small landing that formed into a short hallway. There was a door on each end and one in the middle of the landing. Her mother explained that the middle one was for guests, and the one to the right was for her parents. They entered the room on the left. Mina's new bedroom was shaped in a long rectangle that extended toward the front of the house to their left as they entered. To the left were a couple small windows evenly spaced along the wall. The wall straight ahead had one larger window in the center, and the back wall of the room had a doorway to a large closet. "So, how do you like our new house?" "It's very noisy," Mina replied. "That's just because it's old. Old houses creak and make noises sometimes, but there's nothing to worry about," her mother reassured her. "Other than it being noisy, what do you think? Do you like it?" "Yes. My bedroom is a lot bigger than in the apartment. I'll have much more room to play." Mina smiled as she walked around her room and explored her closet. The next day, the moving truck arrived, and Mina's parents spent most of their time unpacking and setting up the house. Mina occupied herself by arranging her room and playing after her parents set up her bed between the 2 evenly spaced windows across from the closet. Mina decided that she liked her new noisy home. Mina drifted slowly into consciousness and opened her eyes. The darkness of her room was broken only by rays of moonlight that slipped between her curtains. After a few moments, she decided she was thirsty and quietly slipped out of bed. Walking on the balls of her feet, she was able to move almost silently through her room to her door. She quietly opened the door and snuck onto the landing. Now for the difficult part. She carefully placed one foot on the first step close to the wall where it would creak less and slowly shifted her weight. With fingertips grazing the wall on one side and the railing on the other, she continued this process until she got to the bottom of the steps. Mina smiled when she reached the bottom without making a single creak. It had taken her half the summer to learn how to do that. Keeping her left fingertips touching the rail, she turned in that direction and started her way down the hall, grazing the wall on her right with her other fingers. This was something else she'd learned to do on cloudy nights with no moonlight. It helped her know where she was even if she couldn't see that well in the darkness. When she got to the kitchen, she turned on the light. The intensity blinded her, so she squinted until her eyes adjusted. Once she could see comfortably, she made her way to the sink. Her parents couldn't see the kitchen light from their room, making it safe to turn on. She filled a glass with water and began to drink it. Her mind wandered to the nighttime creaking of the old house. She realized she hadn't paid any attention to it for quite a while and wondered why she sometimes noticed things that were always there, yet sometimes she didn't. As she finished her water, she noticed a difference in the creaking sound, more continuous, rhythmic, and moving down the hall toward the kitchen. Mina turned with a start and stared at the doorway, expecting to see one of her parents at any moment. She stared into the darkness as the creaking moved closer, until it stopped at the kitchen. She looked but saw nothing. Mom. Silence. Dad. Silence. Mina reached behind her and fumbled slightly as she placed the glass on the counter, never taking her eyes off the darkness. She had to get back to her room, but she didn't want to go through where she had heard the sound. Walking silently, she made her way to the doorway and looked both ways as quickly as possible. Nothing was there. Mina took one tentative step into the hall and heard a creak to her right. She shot off down the hall, grabbed the end of the rail, swung herself around, and ran up the stairs. She ran through her doorway, closed the door and launched herself under the bedcovers. Mina peeked out of the covers, stared at her door, and listened. Gradually sound settled in. She could hear the creaking move up the stairs until it stopped on the other side of her bedroom door. Mina stared at the door, waiting for something to happen. Only silence and stillness answered. Mina continued watching until her eyes betrayed her, and her mind drifted off into oblivion. Peace and emptiness surrounded Mina. Slowly she became aware of a slow, rhythmic sound. It ebbed and flowed like a wave moving near then far, over and over. Curious, her mind began focusing on the sound. As she did, she noticed that it was made of smaller sounds. Each one became slightly louder, slightly closer, until she felt she could almost touch it. Then, the sounds would move away, growing quieter. Somehow the little sounds seemed familiar and irregular, never quite the same. Creaking, creaking, like the wooden floors in her house. Mina's eyes shot open to stare into the darkness over her bed. It was just a dream. That was all. She'd only been dreaming about the strange noises from the other night. The creaking moved away from her doorway again. Mina turned, pulled the covers over her, and peeked through a crack between the blanket and the bed as she watched her door. Slowly, the creaking steps reached their farthest point near her parents' bedroom door, before slowly coming closer and closer again. Mina stared silently at her door, hoping it was one of her parents, but the steps came to a halt and nothing happened. Something scraped down the outside of her door. Mina hid under the covers. The sound stopped and she waited. She carefully peeked out again at the still closed door. Something scraped down the outside of the door, the handle turned, and the door flung open. Mina screamed into the darkness. Within moments, her parents had rushed into her room, turning on the lights as they went in. "What's wrong?" her mother asked, sitting down beside her and hugging her. "Someone was walking back and forth outside my room, and then they started clawing at the door. The door swung open, and I screamed." Her mom looked worriedly at her dad, but he was already heading back out of her room. "I'll check the house, you stay with her," he said. Mina could see him check the guest room before heading downstairs. She clung to her mother as they waited. After a while, her dad returned and sat down on her other side. "Everything is locked and no one else is in the house," he said as he put his arm around her. "It was probably just a bad dream. Would you like to sleep with us tonight?" her mother asked. Mina wasn't convinced, but she nodded, and her parents led her across the landing to their room. Sunlight flooded the kitchen as Mina ate breakfast with her parents. "Are you looking forward to starting school next week?" her mother asked. Mina paused for a moment to consider, yes and no. "Why not?" "Well, I won't be able to sleep in the middle of the day as much." "Why don't you sleep at night?" her father asked, his fork paused halfway between his plate and mouth. "The footsteps still keep me up, but I'm getting used to it," she replied and continued eating. She barely noticed her parents glance at each other. Mina lay in bed, the rhythmic creaking steps almost lulling her to sleep, until she heard her door open. Her mind jumped back to consciousness as her head snapped down and to the side to stare at her doorway. Darkness and silence loomed within the borders of the doorframe, but she couldn't see the whole landing from this angle. Mina pulled the covers over her head and stared, waiting. Several long moments passed before the creaking footsteps resumed, but this time they were closer. The sounds approached her head, then moved away down the length of her bed before turning and rounding the foot. Then they slowly moved closer to her again. Her hairs raised on the back of her neck. She wanted to look but was too afraid to move. After a pause, the footsteps began retracing their path. Mina strained her eyes to see as the footsteps neared the head of her bed and paused by her head. There was nothing. The floor creaked as the steps made their way back toward the foot of her bed. "Just go away," whispered Mina, and a cold hand grabbed her foot. Mina screamed, and moments later her parents rushed into her room. She threw herself at her mother, with tears streaming down her face. "Something grabbed my foot." She heard her father walk out of the room as her mother embraced her. "You're okay, you're okay." Her father returned a short while later. "It was probably just another bad dream." Mina pushed herself away from her mother and looked at her father. "No. It was real. I wasn't even asleep." She watched her parents exchange looks and knew they didn't believe her. Her mother hugged her again. "I'll stay with you tonight so you can sleep. You want to be well rested for school tomorrow." Her father gave her a hug. "Sleep well," he said before returning to his room. Mina lay in her mother's arms for a while thinking about what had happened. She was too angry that they didn't believe her to fall asleep immediately, but eventually fatigue won. Mina sat alone at one end of the long lunch table in the cafeteria of her new school. She poked at her food but wasn't really hungry. It was her first day, and she was exhausted. She rested head in one hand and stared blankly at her tray. Her mind began to fade and her eyelids fluttered. "Are you okay?" said a strange voice. Mina straightened up and looked in front of her. One of the girls from her class sat on the other side of the table. She vaguely remembered seeing the girl sitting in the back corner of the classroom when she first got there. The girl had energetic eyes, a kind smile, and slightly unkempt hair. The combination of the smile and the frizzled, unkempt hair added a sort of friendly craziness to her appearance. Mina stared blankly at the girl, not knowing what to say. The girl tilted her head to one side. "Why are you so tired?" "You wouldn't understand." "I would if you told me," she said with a smile. Mina was silent. "Why haven't you slept? Is everything okay?" "My house is haunted," whispered Mina. She looked at the other girl's expression, waiting for her to laugh or dismiss her. Instead, the girl got a strange smile on her face. The other girl leaned forward and scrunched up her nose, smiled mischievously, and whispered, "My daddy says we eat the monsters." Mina smiled and the other girl laughed. "I'm Mina. My name is Tabitha. I would love to see an actual ghost. Do you think I could come over to play sometime?" "I don't know. I'd have to ask my parents." The morning light streamed through the kitchen curtains as Mina joined her parents for breakfast. She felt energetic this morning, and it took her a while to realize that she'd fallen asleep to a quiet room the previous night for the first time in weeks. "How was your first day of school?" her father asked. "I made a new friend. Her name is Tabitha," she replied. "I'm so glad to hear that," her mother smiled at her. "Can Tabitha come over and play after school?" Mina asked. "We would need to talk to her parents first to make sure it's okay," said her father. "If you can get her phone number, we can call them tonight," offered her mother. "Okay," Mina said, smiling as she went back to eating. After a minute, her mother got up from the table and left the room. Her mother walked back into the kitchen and addressed her father. "Have you seen the car keys? Aren't they on the hook by the front door?" "No, I can't find them anywhere." "Mina, have you seen the keys?" "Nope," she replied through mouthfuls of cereal. Her parents started searching the house, becoming more agitated as time passed. "Mina, help us look." She could hear the stress in her mother's voice. "Okay." Mina got up and started looking around the living room. It was odd for her parents to misplace their keys. She'd rarely had to help them look for the keys in the past. After several minutes, her mother yelled her name from upstairs. Mina ran up to her room and found her mom standing in front of her closet. "Why were my keys in your closet?" "I don't know." "Did you hide them? Was this supposed to be a joke? Were you playing with them?" her mom asked angrily. "I wasn't playing with your keys," Mina replied with irritation at the false accusation. "Don't talk to your mother with that tone." "You shouldn't lie to us," said her mother. "I'm not lying," screamed Mina as she stormed out of the room. Mina turned the light off in her room and crawled into bed. Her room was peaceful and quiet with rays of moonlight sneaking in between her curtains. She lay in bed staring mindlessly at the silver patterns they painted on her walls. Her consciousness began to drift away and her eyes closed slowly. Then the creaking steps began. Mina came back to wakefulness instantaneously and tried to look through her doorway into the darkness of the landing. The steps moved steadily nearer until they passed through her doorway and began circling her bed again. This time she could feel something pressing into her mattress as the steps passed. Mina lay still in the center of her bed, her eyes following the invisible path of the steps. The creaking footsteps made their way back to the side of her bed nearest the door and paused. Mina couldn't see anything, but she had the distinct feeling of something leaning in close to look at her. She pulled herself away and further into her blanket as she stared into the darkness. The steps moved away, back onto the landing. Mina relaxed slightly. Perhaps it was leaving. Maybe now she could get some sleep. The creaking stopped at the far end of the landing. Several long moments passed in silence, and Mina began to close her eyes. Then the footsteps ran across the landing through her room, and something heavy landed hard on her bed. Mina screamed. A few moments later her father walked in. "You need to be quiet. You have school tomorrow, and your mother and I have work in the morning." "But something hit my bed. We heard you laughing on the landing, then run to your room and scream," he said with irritation in his voice. "Just go to sleep." Mina was confused and angry. She hadn't been playing on the landing, and her father shouldn't be accusing her of something she didn't do. "It's not me. Stop lying to us. There's no one else in your room. You need to grow up," he said in irritation before leaving her room and shutting the door. Mina sank into her blankets, alone in the darkness. The doorbell rang as Mina and her parents were finishing supper in the dining room. She watched her father leave the room to answer the door. Mina and her mother heard a few muffled words before he returned. "We have a guest tonight," he said as he walked back into the room. Mina turned to see who it was and was surprised to see Tabitha standing in the doorway. "Mina, did you invite a friend over without telling us?" her mother asked, giving her a hard glare. "No. Tabitha suggested it, but I didn't tell her she could come over." "Your father took off pretty quickly. I didn't even see taillights driving away when I opened the door," her father commented to Tabitha. "Don't be upset at Mina. I invited myself," Tabitha said with a smile. Her parents exchanged glances, and her mother turned to address Tabitha. "Don't worry, Mrs. Parker, I'll make sure Mina stays quiet tonight. My dad will pick me up in the morning," Tabitha offered before turning to Mina. "Come on, let's go up to your room." Mina's mother closed her mouth in astonishment. She nodded to Mina, and the two girls left the room. The girls sat quietly on the bed in Mina's dark room. Her parents had gone to bed several hours ago, and all was silent and still in the house. Tabitha yawned. "I'm getting sleepy. The ghost isn't here, so we might as well go to sleep. I really wanted to see a ghost though." Mina looked at her friend. It was hard to tell if she was just disappointed or if she didn't believe that the ghost was real. "I'm going to go get a drink of water before I go to sleep. I'll be right back," Tabitha said before walking out of the room. Mina pulled her knees up to her chest and wrapped her arms around her legs. Her parents were mad at her again, and her one friend probably thought she was a liar. She didn't know what to do as she became acutely aware that she was the only thing in the expanse of empty darkness all around her. staring mindlessly at the silver lines of moonlight on her floor. She wasn't sure why she should bother caring anymore. A slight creak came from across the room. It was followed a moment later by another. The steps gathered speed as they approached her bed. Mina's blanket was ripped off the bed and thrown across the room as a great weight slammed into the mattress in front of her. A cold hand gripped her ankle and began to pull her to the foot of the bed. Mina screamed as she was forcefully dragged across the bed and thrown to the floor in the middle of the room. Her parents staggered into the bedroom, angry and sleep-deprived. They turned on the lights. "Stop making so much noise." The light bulb shattered, and the room was plunged into darkness again. Mina could see nothing as her eyes tried to adjust back to the darkness. Her parents' sounds of frustration quickly changed to fear as an angry growl filled the room. She heard the sound of two large objects hitting a wall. She turned her head and could barely make out the forms of her parents lying on the floor on the other side of the bed. Mina began to scramble backward as she saw two red dots appear in the darkness above her parents. The red dots moved toward her, and as they passed through a moonlight beam coming through the blinds, she got a brief glimpse of a ghastly pale visage, withered and twisted with hate. The red eyes stopped inches from her face, and she felt cold hands grip her tightly and lift her off the ground. There was no one left. Her parents were unconscious and she was alone, held aloft by an angry ghost. There was nothing she could do. Tears rolled down her face, and this time she felt cold, frozen air pass over her as the thing growled again. Mina looked away. And that's when she saw the figure in the doorway. It was Tabitha. She was just standing there. "Run!" she screamed at her friend, but Tabitha didn't move. The growl stopped and the red eyes turned toward the door. "My daddy says we eat the monsters," came the reply, as a wicked smile spread across Tabitha's face and the darkness of the night around her grew darker still. The shadows coalesced until all that was left was a Tabitha-shaped void. The ghost dropped Mina, and she saw its eyes move farther from the doorway where Tabitha stood. Tendrils of shadow reached out from the void and wrapped themselves around the unseen form of the ghost. Mina reached up to cover her ears as it shrieked in an unholy agony. In the moonlight, she could see the faint outline of the thing claw at the floor as the shadowy tendrils dragged it inexorably closer to the void. Wood splintered and cracked and the walls shook with the ghost's terrified shrieks. Mina watched in horrified fascination as the ghost was dragged into the void and consumed. The shadows around Tabitha subsided slowly, and the void became her classmate again. Mina backed away when Tabitha approached her. "It's okay. I'm not going to hurt you. I'm your friend." "But..." "It's okay," reassured Tabitha as she knelt before Mina. She reached out and gently stroked Mina's hair. Strangely, she felt herself begin to relax. "You can rest now. Let the darkness of night fulfill its true purpose, giving you rest and peace." That was the last she heard as her exhausted mind relaxed into a restful sleep. Did you like the story? Recommend it to a friend. Did you hate the story? Recommend it to an enemy. Best of all, don't tell them how you felt about it first.